Folks, the potential as well as the possible peril of AI has captured the world's attention this year. Goldman Sachs says 300 million jobs could be affected. Others say it will create trillions of dollars in new wealth. In fact, it's already propelled one company to soar up to a $1 trillion valuation just this year. And today, the global race to find ways to commercialize AI and turn it into profits is officially on. That's why two Wall Street legends, Mark Chaikin and Dr. David Eifrig, are teaming up for the first time ever on July 19th to reveal how artificial intelligence has just shattered one of the most important barriers in technological history. I urge you to tune in and consider what they may have to say carefully. Just head to AIRace2023.com for full details. The one decision you may need to make with your money right now, even if you don't realize it, and why 2023 will be remembered as the year the great AI race began. With over 90 years of combined investing experience, there's nobody better to cut through the hype, answer all of your most burning questions about what AI really means for your money, and help you find the real opportunities to position yourself to grow your wealth as this story accelerates in the months ahead. Again, Mark and Doc will go live on Wednesday, July 19th with all the critical details. You don't want to miss this one. Head to AIRace2023.com right now to make sure you're on their list for updates. Again, that's AIRace2023.com. It's 100% free. Hi, this is Daniela Cambone. Welcome to the official launch of our summer series here on the Daniela Cambone Show on Stansberry Research. And I have invited a fan favorite to be the inaugural guest of our show. Please welcome back Rick Rule, founder of Rule Investment Media. Rick, always good to see you. Welcome back.
A pleasure, Daniela. It's delightful to be back with you. Thank you for having me back.
Well, you know, I know you've been making the rounds. You've been doing a lot of interviews. And there was just, I couldn't wait to have you on because obviously since we last spoke, there's been many updates in regards to the BRICS and this idea or notion of them releasing a gold-backed currency. Obviously want to get your thoughts on that. We have new news on the inflation front. I also wanted to talk about your recent comments on de-dollarization because the last time you were on, you made a very strong statement that resonated with the audience when you said that the beginning of the end of the US dollar domination was near. And you also said, I view the ongoing de-dollarization as a good thing for the world, but you view central bank digital currencies as being substantially worse than cancer. Now, I have to say, Rick, when I saw that quote, I said, wow, I needed you to elaborate on that. Substantially worse than cancer.
You want to start with that one?
I do. I just thought we'd start with a light one.
Well, hosts often ask me to give a line that will make a good headline in an interview so that they can get a broader audience. And there was probably a bit of that, probably a bit of pandering for an audience. And obviously, if you contract cancer, that is of more concern to you than central bank digital currencies. But I actually do believe that the potential impact on humankind from a central bank digital currency could and would be worse than the cumulative impact of cancer on humankind. The idea that governments, which from my point of view are too powerful and too inclined to war and too inclined to abuse today, would have a tool that would allow them to eliminate people's savings, people's medium of exchange, people's wealth, if those people didn't behave in the way that the big thinkers wanted, is terrifying. The combination of the fairly well-documented social scoring being undertaken now in the People's Republic of China, with the ability of central bank digital currencies with built-in features that make them cancelable, is absolutely scary. Remember, not too long ago, Daniela, Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada decided that people who had made contributions to a group that was opposed to him politically, the truckers of Canada, should have their bank accounts, their brokerage accounts, and some of their insurance products seized. These people had made these contributions, among other things, before Mr. Trudeau, without recourse to the courts, by the way, had retroactively made them illegal. And Mr. Trudeau used the power of the state to affect the outcome of a domestic political dispute. The idea that governments around the world would have the ability to silence political opponents or to punish people whose own actions were not in the interest of the big thinkers is absolutely terrifying to me. It's simply put, other than nuclear weapons, the worst idea I've ever heard.
And to that point, I mean, the July 20th arrival of the FedNow payment system, and yes, the Fed has made it clear this is not a central bank digital currency, but it's definitely, who can argue against the fact that it's definitely the system needed to welcome a central bank digital currency. So talk to us a little bit about your views on FedNow and whether it's a surefire path to CBDCs.
I'm not sure it's a surefire pass. I don't know how much abuse or potential abuse the citizenry is willing to stomach. I really, truly don't. I actually view this as an existential threat to personal freedom and to personal liberty. I don't know what the political will of the American public will be with regards to giving the government really, truly breathtaking amounts of power over individual activities. I really, truly don't know. I'm surprised that more people aren't horrified. I would ask people who voted happily for Biden how they would feel with Trump in control of this technology. I would ask people who voted for Trump how they would feel were Biden in control of this technology. If you want to look at where this could go, simply review the actions of Prime Minister Trudeau 3 or 4 months ago. I realize, in a sense, Daniela, I didn't answer your question. I'm astonished that the proposal has gotten as far as it has.
No, it's great because you've actually raised more questions for me. So one, I absolutely agree with you, Rick. I'm surprised that more people are not horrified, but to that point, are we talking about it enough? I know channels like mine are, but do we hear about it on mainstream media? I mean, does the average person know about the FedNow system?
I must admit, Daniela, my hang time on mainstream media, other than, say, Bloomberg, is fairly limited. So,
Right.
as you know, Danny.
Well, I can assure you, because I do monitor what they're doing and what they're saying and whatnot. And I don't think that there is enough talk out there about FedNow. But I do think it's reassuring that you said that we don't know if people will be up in arms. And I find that reassuring that everyone's just not going to be, in a zombie-like state and welcoming this. And I guess the other question you raised by bringing up, presidents and potential future presidential candidates and whoever will be next in line and can usher in a new Fed chair. I mean, could this be reversed? Or would they not want to reverse it?
My own belief, I guess taught me by 50 years as an adult watching politicians, is that their lust for power can't be diminished. And from the point of view of the political class, I think this is an amazing tool to accomplish whatever it is that they might want to accomplish. Were there voices, as an example, that were particularly effective about something convenient to the politicians, say quantitative easing, and those voices questioned the efficacy of the political class, it would be very tempting, were you a member of the political class, to silence that voice simply by confiscating his or her private wealth. Canceling it, in effect. This word cancel, which has become so popular, is taking on a brand new meaning. I think that people need maybe to review the concept of the basic concept of what private wealth and private money is. You money is maybe a means of expressing your will. It's also a way that society keeps score. And I don't mean keep score in terms of who's ahead, but rather you become wealthy by providing goods or services that other people are willing to pay you for. They value that good and service more than they value their own private savings. You become wealthy by providing a good or service. And the idea that a group of politicians can cancel the benefit that someone has received by providing a good or service, by the way, canceling it obviously without the will of the person being canceled, that sounds almost like the dictionary definition of slavery. And I think if people begin to review the issue in that sense, if they view this as a technology that makes it more efficient for the state to enslave them, to confiscate some measure of the value that they created for other people through their skills and through their labor, then perhaps there would be a more thorough discussion of these issues.
Rick, I was also excited to get you on to get your thoughts on the latest news coming from the BRICS, Russia, China, and company regarding their idea or motion to start a currency that would be competing with the US dollar, one that would be backed by gold. Now, there's been so much analysis on, what this will mean for the price of gold, and is it really realistic that they could, issue one, and we'll talk that. But first, what I find interesting, Rick, is why would they be so transparent about the fact they're even working on a competing currency?
I think working on a competing currency and being seen as standing up to the U.S. And the extraterritorial imposition of U.S. will on other people is very popular domestically. I think if you're South African, being seen to stand up to the United States, if you're Russian, being seen to stand up to the United States, if you're an Argentine, being seen to stand up to the United States, is an important messaging for domestic politics. And I think that's behind a lot of the messaging. That is to say, the early messaging. I think, too, that in order for any common currency among, in particular, developed and frontier nations to have any chance of succeeding, that currency has to be fairly broadly adopted. So the idea that rather than having 4 participants, they could have 25 or 30 participants, which I think is part of the early signaling, would be important.
I mean, do you think that the U.S. is looking at this? I mean, Yellen has been vocal about the fact that the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, its status is being chipped away. I thought that was interesting. So they're obviously paying attention. But how concerned do you think they are?
I think that if they're not concerned, they should be. De Gaulle described the United States possession, if you will, of the reserve currency status as exorbitant privilege. It is precisely the fact that ours is the deepest, most liquid, most transparent financial market in the world that allows us to do the quantitative easing, which is to say the counterfeiting that we have done. We export our deficit to other countries as a sort of a fee that we get, we being Americans, get for maintaining the world's reserve currency. I need to say that the enemy of our status as a reserve currency is not cited in Moscow or Beijing or Buenos Aires or or Sao Paulo. It's cited in the United States. Mm-hmm. The weaponization of the U.S. dollar, the weaponization of the SWIFT banking system, the twin deficits and debts which erode confidence in U.S. Treasury securities, means that the real threat to the dollar doesn't come from the BRICS. It comes from Congress and the voters. I think it's important in this discussion, too, Daniela, to clear up a misconception, they are describing a currency that's backed by gold, but they don't have enough gold
Right.
to back the quantity of transactions that they expect to have transpire
Right.
with this currency. What I think people should understand that this currency is denominated in gold. Backed by gold suggests, Danielle, that if you had 100,000, quote, bricks, that you could submit those bricks and they would give you the gold. Good luck with that. I'd love to see you, well, I would like to see you do this. You're my friend. But I'd love to see somebody who I didn't like fly over to Moscow with 100,000 bricks and say to Putin, I'll take my gold, please. It is a mistake to consider this to be a gold-backed currency because they don't have enough gold. It's a mistake, too, to think that they could acquire the gold because most of the countries that make up the so-called BRICS, every country, frankly, with the exception of China and Saudi Arabia, don't have economies that generate enough surplus that they could buy sufficient gold to back even a fraction of the currency that would be regarded to maintain their economy.
So the question then, Rick, is you don't, in order for this to launch successfully, you don't need gold to back every dollar?
I believe that you do probably need gold to back up every dollar. I suspect what this will evolve into is a multilateral trading mechanism that allows countries to settle surpluses and deficits between them as a way around the US dollar. I do not believe that this will supplant the dollar, nor do I believe, frankly, that special drawing rights will supplant the dollar as a reserve currency in my lifetime. For the record, I'm 70. I do think that we're evolving into a multipolar world and that more societies will find ways to finance trade outside the dollar than they have done in the past.
Yeah.
So I believe that the supremacy of the US dollar will continue to be, quote, chipped away at. But I believe that we're moving towards a multipolar world, not a world dominated by the euro, the yen, or the BRICS.
And for you, is that it's not necessarily a bad thing?
I think that the United States needs to evolve into a mindset where we acknowledge that other people have their own ideas about their future. And I believe that we need to find a way to settle peacefully into that role. To the extent that we had as a society, by we I mean the United States, paid attention to our budget, to the extent that we hadn't rolled up $120 trillion in recourse liabilities, net present value at the federal level, to the extent that we hadn't attempted to impose our will extraterritorially, we wouldn't be having this discussion. The US dollar, when we behaved ourselves, was an absolutely wonderful reserve currency. We had and have a very, very liquid and very, very transparent securities market in the United States, far and away the best in the world. We still represent 22 or 23% of the total savings and investment assets in the world. The only enemy of the U.S. franchise is the U.S.
Rick, who was in charge when the US was behaving themselves?
Well, I'd like to believe that the U.S. people were in charge. I think that we began to weaponize the U.S. dollar probably in the Bush administration. Certainly, the traditional role of the Republicans, or the alleged role of the Republicans, in terms of keeping the deficits in track, is something that went away going all the way back to the Reagan years. But I suspect that the weaponization of the U.S. dollar and the weaponization of the SWIFT banking system, and I'm no political scientist, probably began in the Bush administration. Understand that I wouldn't say I'm bipartisan, I'm nonpartisan. I think the track record of the Democrats is awful, and the track record of the Republicans runs neck and neck with the Democrats. This isn't something about Democrats or Republicans. This is something about the political class in general. and the fact that they so believe in their various missions that they believe in using any means necessary to attain their short-term goals, even including costing the United States this exorbitant privilege which comes from maintaining the world's reserve currency.
I want to move on now, Pete, and look at Texas just quickly here, Rick, because you don't even have to look so far as the BRICS, but in the United States itself, where Texas is looking to have its own backed digital currency now, and basically as a state, are they saying that they want to go up against the Fed and take some control back? I mean, what do you make of movements like what we're seeing there?
I think this is probably reminiscent of what the foreign countries are doing. I think this plays very well in Texas politically. I think it's mostly for domestic political consumption in the state of Texas. The United States, for all its faults, benefits from having a common currency, common laws, common rule of law across 50 states. For all our faults, as I say, with a fairly small proportion of the world's population and the world's landmass, we represent 23% of the world's savings and investment assets. And I don't take what Texas is saying particularly seriously, because Texas and individual players in the Texas economy have to deal with 50 other states. Were Texas to focus, as it has done in the past, in balancing its own budget and reducing the burden of government on its citizenry, that would probably be enough in terms of service of the state of Texas to the citizens of the state of Texas.
Rick, I want to talk inflation with you now. I mean, we see the numbers cooling, yet the Fed's telling us, well, they're still not happy with what they're seeing, and yes, we had the pause, but more rate hikes are coming. So, two different messages there. What's your take on inflation? Should we be breathing a sigh of relief yet?
I don't believe so. For various reasons, don't believe so. I think the Fed, relative to their mandate, has done a pretty good job. The Fed is on record as saying that they don't believe that Congress will get its fiscal house in control, so that the only method that seems to be open to the Fed is manipulating the interest rate. I'm astonished by the relative strength of the U.S. economy, which is to say that we have been able to fashion these interest rate rises without bringing, as an example, home construction or the bond market to a screeching halt. I take the Fed at their word as saying that their primary goal right now is fighting inflation and the strength in the economy. They say, and I think futures markets are saying, will allow them probably 2 more 25 basis point interest rate rises. The other thing that needs to be considered, though, and I really want your listeners to think about this, is the way that they measure inflation. The CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is a very artificial construct. And in terms of maintaining faith in the U.S. economy, when it suits the big thinkers, they often report the CPI after the so-called volatiles, after food and fuel. Well, that's a fairly silly index for anybody who, like me, enjoys to eat. But a bigger criticism, and I really want your listeners to think about this, is if you are construing the CPI as a cost of living increase, index, please note that the CPI doesn't include tax. As a component of the cost of living for most American families, tax is the largest expense that they face, greater than food, greater than shelter, greater than energy, and greater than transportation combined. A cost of living increase that doesn't take into account the cost of government, the cost of taxation, is, from my point of view, a completely fallacious index. And I think when we're talking to your listeners, Danny, about the potential impact of inflation on them, I think that your listeners need to look at their household budget and understand that the deterioration of the purchasing power of their savings, personally, is much greater than the stated rate of inflation. And what's really important to each individual family is the outcome for each individual family, measuring the impact of inflation on the purchasing power of their savings. Is much more important than feeling placated by the sort of bleatings of the political class about inflation through the mainstream media.
And just to make things even more complicated, Rick, the classic recession indicator, the yield curve, just hit its lowest level since 1981, right? But now we have Janet Yellen saying, look, it really doesn't look like we're going to have a recession despite the lag that we're seeing in China. It shouldn't spill over here in the US. Thoughts on this?
As I say, I'm very impressed by the apparent strength of the US economy, given the interest rate rises that we have experienced. I think Ms. Yellen's principal job is maintaining confidence, and I suspect that she is employing the time-honored technique of talking her book. I'm not sure she believes what she says. I note that in the face of impending shortages, the copper market is weak. I note that in the face of impending shortages, the oil market is weak. I note that despite Ms. Yellen's bleatings, that the yield curve says recession is nigh. I think from the point of view of individual savers and investors, that even if you don't believe that a recession is probable, that you assign a high enough possibility that you maintain in your own portfolio what I might call recession insurance, that you maintain some portion of your portfolio that's risk off and liquid, and that you pay perhaps more attention to the yield curve, that is to say the market, than you do to Ms. Yellen. That way, if you are wrong from a position of strength. I think it's important to view all of these things in terms of the way it might impact your own household and your own savings, and I would be prudent at this juncture.
And on that note, Rick, you always hammer home the point of how much cash was king to you in this period. Is that still the case?
I think it has to be, unfortunately. I'm very cognizant of the fact that the cash portion of my portfolio is costing me purchasing power. I have lived through several periods of liquidity constraints, like 2008. And what I have noticed is that cash gave me both the tools and the courage to take advantage of those liquidity crises rather than being taken advantage of by them. I've come to suggest in previous interviews that you and I have done, Danny, that the foregone purchasing power that happened to me as a consequence of high cash levels was really an option payment on having the liquidity that was necessary to take advantage of bad markets rather than being taken advantage of by bad markets. I would also note in terms of personal portfolios that if we go into interest rate declines, that long bonds might be a good asset. But I think long bonds are an absolutely toxic trap, which is to say, if you are going to play in the long bond market with this type of incipient inflation, that you regard them as a speculative asset class, as a trading vehicle, not as an investment.
I brought up Biden canceling billions of dollars in student debt before, Rick. I wanted to ask you that because I know you're such a big proponent of education, and I just don't mean college degrees, but educating yourself in any form you feel fit. I mean, if we're going to be canceling billions of dollars in debt, should education just be free in the country?
No. I think that the educational markets, if you will, have been skewed anyway by the ability of people to invest their time and your treasure, that is to say, your money, pursuing degrees that don't generate any utility for society. At least they don't generate enough utility that people with those degrees can get a job in the private sector. I believe, too, that if you contract with somebody for the provision of a good or service, which is what you do when you borrow money, that you have a contractual obligation to honor your debt. And I think the idea that a group of people can combine themselves into a lobbying force and steal money from the rest of society, which is what obviating a debt is, that sets an extraordinarily bad precedent. It reminds me of the old, I guess it was a Mencken adage, that elections are advanced auctions of stolen property at best. You had a group of votes that the administration was trying to buy, which is to say alumni, ex-students, and they set out to do it by canceling the obligation that those former students had to society. Very clearly, this is a transfer of wealth from one portion of the citizenry, which is to say the savers, to a different portion of the citizenry, which is to say the spenders. And I think it's very bad policy.
You mentioned before, and let's wrap on politics, why not, that you are nonpartisan, that the Democrats have a horrible track record, as do the Republicans. So could it be a third party candidate that could really throw a wrench in things this presidential cycle?
I don't think so. I think Americans unfortunately identify as Democrats or Republicans, or at very best hyphenated Americans. I think that there may be some internecine warfare in both the Republican ranks and in the Democratic ranks. I noticed the popularity, as an example, of Kennedy among the rank and file, which has caused him to be despised
Right.
by the party brass. And I think had the Republican Party brass been able to quietly thank and excuse Mr. Trump, that they certainly would have done so. So I suspect that rather than the ascendancy of a third party, what you're going to begin to see, or see a continuation of, is internecine warfare in both parties. Probably not a bad thing, by the way. The very best I could hope for, not being a Democrat or a Republican, but someone who is in favor of individual rights, would be a stalemate, which is to say a government that was even less functional than the government that we have.
You mentioned Kennedy. I mean, do you think he has a chance at the presidency?
I do. I think popular dissatisfaction is high. I think that Mr. Kennedy speaks to those people of both parties who are sick of the political class. Make no mistake, Mr. Kennedy is no fan of small government. He is just in favor of a different band of constituencies. He'd like to steal on behalf of a different band of constituencies than the more mainstream Democrats and mainstream Republicans. I think, however, that there is a longing in the citizenry of the United States for someone who unites it, even if that unity is achieved at the price of a common lie, which is what I suspect that the Kennedy message is.
Rick, tell us the latest on Battle Bank. I mean, what has been the interest in your latest venture here, especially in the midst of all this banking drama? Are people just desperate for a new, fresh solution?
Yeah, finally you have me on a subject where I can smile.
It is our summer series.
Battle Bank, for the listeners that aren't aware of it, is what I'm doing in retirement. I celebrated turning 70 by backing some people starting a new bank. This is the team that years ago successfully started EverBank. And in answer to the question, Daniela, there couldn't be a better time, I think, to start a bank. The industry is in total disarray. When I ask people in public gatherings, how many here are happy and satisfied with your current banking relationships, in a group of 500, maybe 12 or 15 hands go up, which is to say dissatisfaction with banks in the United States as they exist today, dissatisfaction is extremely, extremely high. Battle Bank hopes to succeed by, first of all, not having any branches. I know I personally receive no benefit from the big box bank branch that I go to. Very nice manager, but she doesn't understand anything about the products, which makes sense because they have too many products. rather than offer 15 savings products, 5 of which pay you no interest, we'll offer you one. You can write a check up against it. You can do whatever you want, but it will be in the top quartile, of interest rate payers nationwide. And we intend, on the other side of the balance sheet, to lend against assets that we understand and know. As an example, no bank in the United States that I know of is making loans secured by bullion, gold and silver, in segregated storage. We will do that. As to interest, when we started EverBank, which, by the way, we grew from $0 to $28 billion, we had 0 customer backlog. At Battle Bank, the people who have expressed interest in opening deposit accounts with us is now at 8,400. So I would say that the interest around Battle Bank is very strong. I'm also delighted to say, Daniela, early on in the process, we were having slow go with the regulators. It stands to reason that the FDIC during the banking crisis had bigger worries than a startup bank. And I would say that we weren't their top priority. I'm delighted to say that our application with all of our regulators, the FDIC, the Fed, and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, going very well now. And while you frequently will hear me be a critic of the government and a critic of the big bureaucracies, I need to say that the people on the ground in all 3 institutions, particularly at the local level, has been surprisingly good. So from that viewpoint, the bank is progressing well, too.
Rick, as always, thank you so much for joining me. And I guess just one thing before I let you go. When you were on the last time, you spoke about the little things we can do in life to change people's lives. And you said how you always like paying the waiter or waitress in cash. And so many people responded to that, saying that they were planning to do that. So I thank you for your wisdom. And I'll leave you the last word here.
Well, thank you for that, Danny. You make the world a better place, not by voting, but by acting. And being kind to people who serve you is a wonderful way to act. I guess my final word would be this. For people who care what I have to say about investing, an easy way to continue the conversation is to go to ruleinvestmentmedia.com and enter your natural resource stock portfolio. I will personally rank that portfolio 1 to 10, and I'll comment on individual issues where I think my comments might have value. If people are really interested in what I have to say, I would love them to either come physically or virtually to the Rule Investment Symposium in Boca Raton, Florida, July 23rd through 27th. I humbly believe this is the best natural resources investment conference in the world. I believe it enough that if you attend either physically or live stream virtually in your own home, that if you don't think I gave you your money's worth, email me and I'll refund all your money. Note, too, that the conference, if you attend either virtually or physically, will be available to you in recorded form for 6 months. So I would love to rank people's portfolios, but more particularly, I would like to greet them either virtually or physically in Boca Raton, Florida, July 23 through 27.
He is a man of his word, and I can vouch for the fact he answers every single email. Rick Rule, it is an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you always for your incredible insights. I appreciate you.
My pleasure, Danny, and thank you for allowing me to have this conversation in front of your audience.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you all for watching. We'll have more incredible content coming your way, so be sure to stay tuned to the Daniela Camboni Show, and don't forget to sign up at danielacamboni.com. That's it for me. Thanks for watching.
Opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the contributor and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Stansberry Research, its parent company, or affiliates.